You caught up on the big stories of the week.
This has been an incredible visit. I think a lot of good has come of it. We've made some fantastic trade deals, great for both countries. He's a man I respect greatly, become really a friend. We did discuss Iran. We feel very similar to Iran. We want that to end. We don't want them to have a nuclear weapon. We want the straits open. We're closing it now. I mean, they closed it, and we closed it on top of them. But we want the straits open, and we want them to get it ended because it's a crazy thing. They're a little bit crazy.
President Trump met with Xi Jinping for their final closed-door discussion at the symbolic headquarters of China's ruling Communist Party. Xi told reporters he chose the historic venue to return the kindness from when Trump invited him to Mar-a-Lago back in 2017. In a Truth Social post from earlier in the day, President Trump attempted to clean up comments apparently made by Xi about the U.S. being a declining nation, insisting the leader was talking about his predecessor's time in office. So almost 2 years in, it's still Joe Biden's fault. Willie, again, what was not to imitate SNL, it just seems to me the president says it was an incredible visit. For who? What was accomplished and what was the initial goal?
Yeah, also might want to back off the sleepy Joe Biden comment when you're falling asleep in public.
Come on
Almost
now.
Every time we see you.
Sentence.
The question is, what are the deliverables, as they put it in diplomatic terms? When you go to a trip, there's always something that's been wired ahead of time that you can say, we accomplished this here, we both walk away. They have said it's mutually beneficial without giving much specifics. President Trump announced that China had planned to buy now 200 jets from Boeing. Very specific news. When asked after the president left a couple of hours ago, Chinese officials kind of said, well, we made some deals that are mutually beneficial, did not confirm that deal. We'll see if that bears out. Let's bring into the conversation the former United States ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns. He also led the State Department's Iran policy from 2005 to 2008. Ambassador, great to have you with us on this morning. So now that the president is on the plane on his way back to Alaska for a stop there, assess for us what happened over the last couple of days and what the United States takes away from this summit.
You know, I think the most important thing that happened is that President Trump went there, and I'm serious about that. It's a top-down system in China. Xi Jinping makes all the big decisions, so you've got to have head of state relations that work. And I hope that they've been able to establish that kind of relationship. But there are a lot of troubling questions left unanswered. The first is on Taiwan. You saw that shot across the bow by Xi Jinping, meant to intimidate the United States when Xi said that if the U.S. crosses China's red lines on Taiwan, there could be a conflict between us. That's meant to intimidate. And what I'm looking for is whether or not now the United States, the Trump administration, goes back to the big Taiwan arms packages that they put aside in anticipation of this visit to Beijing and move it forward. The Chinese obviously don't want us to do that, but we have to do it because we've got to strengthen Taiwan's defenses. I think that's the first big test. And the second test will be on Iran. It's not surprising that the Chinese said, Xi Jinping said that they want the Strait open without Iran as a tollkeeper. It's not surprising that the Chinese said they don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. That's been their position for 20 years since I was negotiating this issue for the George W. Bush administration. But what has to happen now is that China ought to go forward, use its considerable authority with the Iranian government and its credibility, and push the Iranians towards a ceasefire agreement. I'm skeptical that'll happen, that the Chinese will actually go out of their way to bail us out. So lots of other unanswered questions, but I think those are the two big ones.
Ambassador, just going back to your first question on Taiwan, obviously President Xi was looking for some distance between President Trump and Taiwan in a way that previous presidents have not shown that. President Trump has shown that he's open to being a little bit further from Taiwan than others have been. Do you have concerns that China perhaps smells weakness or vulnerability in this president in terms of his relationship to Taiwan and that it may actually take action there?
I do have those concerns. I have concerns that the Chinese feel that President Trump, in his second tour in office, has not been at all clear about upholding our traditional half-century policy one China policy, which means that we do provide weaponry to the Taiwan authorities to help them strengthen their deterrence. And that's the opening. And you may remember about 6 weeks ago, President Xi and President Trump talked on the phone, and President Trump said he was negotiating this issue of arms sales with China. Well, no American president has agreed to negotiate what we do towards Taiwan with the leadership in Beijing. So I think there is that concern. I don't think a Chinese cross-strait attack is imminent. That's not the immediate issue right now. But they do, I think, sense a weakening, a softening in the U.S. position. And I really hope that President Trump did not lead them in that direction during these talks.
Mr. Ambassador, President Trump, as mentioned, is wheels up from Beijing on Air Force One. He actually just provided his first thoughts on Truth Social about the summit. I'll just read the first sentence. China has a ballroom, and so should the USA. So that shows you where he is right now. He's pushing the ballroom. He also already mentioned something about the gold statue in Doral. I wrote a piece ahead of this trip that, saying that the goal was sort of to do no harm, that they didn't want to make things worse. And you correctly identified a couple of flashpoints that could be tension down the road. But it seems like the relations between the U.S. and China, the two biggest powers in the globe, didn't get worse over the last couple of days. But it also seems like not that much was actually accomplished either.
Well, it looks like there's going to be a resumption of agricultural purchases by the Chinese. That's very important for our farm and ranch economy. The Chinese have been diminishing it over the last couple of years because of all the, frankly, the friction we've had, both in the Biden and Trump administrations. They're also going to go ahead with the buy of Boeing, but they've been delaying that for 6 years. So I think that's just getting those two issues, agricultural sales and Boeing, back to where they should have been several years ago. The one thing that didn't happen, which I was encouraged by, is that there was no announcement that the Chinese would purchase the H200 chip from, this is the advanced semiconductor chip, from NVIDIA. And I think that's important because I have opposed the Trump administration's willingness to have our most advanced chips sold to the Chinese market. That only helps the Chinese competitors to our tech companies, but it also puts our military at a disadvantage because the People's Liberation Army will get hold of this sophisticated technology. So the fact that that didn't happen, I thought was a positive sign. And one last issue Scott Bessent talked about yesterday. He said there is going to be the start of talks between the two countries on artificial intelligence, particularly this issue of security from terrorist groups and criminal groups with the mythos model of Anthropic so powerful. I think it does make sense for the U.S. and China to begin to talk together. How do we work together to mitigate the worst aspects of what criminal and terrorist groups could do with these powerful AI models?
Ambassador, as we've been noting for the last couple of days, it is extraordinary when you take a step back that the President of the United States, in the middle of a war with Iran, is meeting with the leader of China, who is backing Iran in the war that the United States is prosecuting. You touched on this a little bit earlier, but do you believe that China has the leverage over Iran to change the dynamics of this war, to at least bring them to the table? And are you skeptical that they will, in fact, use that leverage, if they have it, to help bring this war to an end?
You know, I think China does have a lot of leverage because they purchase 1.4 million barrels a day at a steep discount from Iran, at a steep discount in favor of China. China's been the largest, exporter of goods to Iran as well. And so they do have influence. I doubt they'll use it. You know, the old saying, don't interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. I think that's how the Chinese look at the United States right now in the Middle East, particularly in the Strait of Hormuz. And the Chinese would pay a price, if you will, for forsaking Iran in terms of the politics of this in the China-Iran relationship. Just as China didn't lift a finger to help, couldn't, Venezuela back in early January when the U.S. went in and kidnapped Maduro. They haven't helped Iran very much. To completely side with the United States, I think, would be difficult for China's reputation in the authoritarian world, which is where Xi Jinping lives. So I'm a little bit skeptical. I hope the Chinese would use their influence to help the U.S. to open the strait with no tollkeeper. But that remains to be seen.
So what is coming out of this trip? Winners, losers, and what is the incentive for China to help the U.S. on Iran?
I think there's very little incentive for China to help the U.S. on Iran.
The Strait specifically.
In the Strait specifically, just the immediate update from the Strait is that a boat was sunk yesterday. Another one was taken by Iranian forces and dragged toward the Iranian coastline. So no change there. And then the long term, and you talked about it yesterday, it was a story I did about Chinese companies, private companies, selling anti-aircraft missiles, or they're considering the sale of anti-aircraft missiles to Iran. China's long-term goal is for America's attempt at regime change in Iran to fail. They don't want that to succeed. They want this regime to exist. They want it to antagonize the U.S. They want the U.S. to lose resources there. They want it to be our Ukraine. So that's not going to change. I talked to a shipping expert who talked about how all these ships are going to resume. Even if there is a peace deal, China will continue to send components and fuel for missiles to help them rebuild their missile stock. No matter what agreement is reached, China, I think, will help Taiwan rebuild those missile stocks, get them anti-aircraft missiles. They'll do them through private companies, but China's goal is to weaken us. And I didn't see any breakthroughs regarding Iran in this trip.
Yeah, I'm not hearing any reporting. No, it really, like, what exactly was the win here? There seems to be no answer. A lot of private meetings and family members came, like a commerce gathering, that Chamber of Commerce meeting
it
in
almost
China.
Seemed like President Trump was playing the role of Commerce Secretary here in terms of trying to get some business deals done. There may be some vague outlines of agreements, but it's not sure that anything is concrete yet. We'll see what comes out next few days as both sides read out the particulars. But John Hammond, maybe the U.S. didn't inflame the situation with China, but it's not clear if anything really was accomplished. And for the president, I think the two big takeaways is that the situation in Iran remains unchanged, and we know the economic toll that's taking here in the United States, but also just a sense of weakness. That Xi Jinping is there in Beijing, presiding over the summit, by most measures, in a stronger position than the president of the United States, who's bogged down with a war he can't budge.
Right. I want to just think about two very simple things here. But one of them is the question of deliverables that Willie was talking about before, because that's what Trump's metric is, right? He wants to be able to come back from a summit and say, we signed the biggest deal ever on this. We made the biggest agreement ever on that. He yesterday touted this Boeing thing, right? Which was kind of they agreed to buy 200 jets. The Wall Street's expectation was that the deal was going to be somewhere closer to 500, and Boeing shares went down 5% yesterday on the news that Trump was touting. Huge deal for Boeing, 200. They thought it was only going to be 150. Well, Wall Street told you exactly what it thought about that deal, and I think that in and of itself is not a big deal, but that's the kind of thing Trump wants to take credit for. The second thing is your point about what looked kind of pathetic, and I saw your Hippocratic headline, made me think about the Greeks and the fact that you have Xi Jinping. The context for that Truth Social post that Trump put up was Xi Jinping is talking to Trump, apparently in private, about the Thucydides trap. The Thucydides trap is about what happens when a rising power and there's a declining power. He didn't call the United States the declining power, but said, we have to be careful, China and the U.S., to avoid the Thucydides trap, because what often happens in the Thucydides trap is that the declining power sees the rising power and provokes a war. So basically, this is Xi Jinping saying, let's not get into war, but the implication was
decline. That
the U.S. was in decline. And Trump's response to that was so sad. I mean, not just the fact that he's blaming Joe Biden, Mika, but let's read the first sentence of it where he says something like, yesterday, when Xi Jinping so elegantly...
I have it here. When President Xi very elegantly referred to the United States as perhaps being a declining nation.
That's all you need.
It's
an amazing thing to write. It's one of the more incredible Trump sentences ever. Yeah. As he very elegantly, because I can't ever say anything critical of Xi Jinping, let alone... He
never does.
Right, but that is just he treats, in that, he sounds like he's talking about Vladimir Putin. And I think you didn't have to pin the tail on the donkey and say the United States is the declining power for it to be very clear that in the optics and dynamics and on any metric that Trump understands, let alone the rest of the world, which of those two countries is a declining country. And Xi Jinping didn't need to say it directly. It's pretty clear to everyone where they stand in terms of relative power and trajectory.
Working class Americans would agree with that.
Just
why on a grand scale.
Why speak that way to an authoritarian leader who has like the greatest firewall in the world in terms of stopping the free flow of information, who's jailed Jimmy Lai, the publisher, pro-democracy advocate from Hong Kong. Yes, and Donald Trump has no problem belittling political rivals in the U.S. and being incredibly mean to other people. And I just looking back, Trump made his bed here.
Much more still ahead on Morning Joe Weekend. Stay with us.
When I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's all. That's the only thing that motivates.
I don't think about Americans' financial situation. President Trump with that admission to a reporter yesterday. The comment came as he was leaving the White House, headed for his big summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing.
I mean, really, Willie, come on. Like, Democrats are now going, wait, is he
saying that openly?
For us? I mean, this is the nightmare of the American firsters who said, oh, we don't want to get involved in worry about us here at home. And all of the people told C. Gabbard that said, he will never get you into wars. He will worry about you. He will never do this. He will worry about you. J.D. Vance, the same. You can go down the list of everybody. You can go down the list of all of the talkers that said the same thing. And he literally is saying, I'm not worried about you. I don't even think about you. I'm worried about an endless war, which, by the way, the New York Times and others followed. We haven't, as the CIA analyst told me weeks ago, we're just like the numbers we're making up are just, they mean nothing. Iran is locked and loaded still.
Yeah, and has missiles that can reach the Strait of Hormuz if it wants to. We're going to get into that reporting as well. But that clip we just played, that's clip and save for Democrats throughout this campaign season. He's been showing that he doesn't care about Americans' financial situations since the beginning of this war as gas prices and food prices have risen. Now he's just saying it out loud. I actually don't care. And I was thinking back, Joe, to like all those times where you had to interpret or spin a president being out of touch. George H.W. Bush misreading the grocery scanner or whatever.
Exactly.
And now you have a president just saying, I don't care about your financial situation.
And the financial situation getting so bad, we're going to show the clip later on, leave Larry Kudlow. When you've lost Larry Kudlow, baby. And he's like, these are just horrible numbers. Inflation's going up. Jobless concerns are going up. Gas prices are going up. Healthcare is skyrocketing. Rent is skyrocketing. People's ability to afford their first home getting further out of reach than ever before. It's just the reality. It's just, this is how Americans live. And we're going to show you polls. Like, man, this isn't Democrats saying it. It's not independent. It's everybody saying it, man. Like 70% of Americans, 75% of Americans say everything costs too much. We're in a terrible situation. And the president picks that day to go out there while he's worried about golden arches and he's worried about golden ballrooms, and we find out about this Trump gold phone scam, and he's worried about crypto, and he's worried about their family making billions and billions of dollars. Goes and says, yeah, well, we're doing great, but we don't really care about how you and your family are doing.
I've never run for office, but if I were to, and the standard bearer for my opponent's party were to say that, it would feature prominently in every campaign ad. And it's certainly, that was an in-kind contribution to Democrats there from President Trump. And you're right, we're going to go through it. The poll numbers are catastrophic for Trump and Republicans, particularly on his handling of the economy, which was supposed to be a strength.
Well, you add on top of that the fact that he constantly mocks affordability. He calls it, quote, bullshit that the Democrats made up. Americans feel it every day. I had people sending me like the cost of butter and milk and saying, thanks, Biden, during the Bucket administration. What a lot of Americans would do right now to go back and have costs what they were when Joe Biden left office.
Americans felt better about the economy under Joe Biden than they do right now.
By the way, we have numbers that show overwhelmingly, Americans feel better about the economy under Joe Biden than they do Donald Trump. Let me say that again. Overwhelmingly. I know for people in their little bubbles, they don't want to hear this, but overwhelmingly, Americans felt better about life under Biden than Trump.
And Trump seems out of touch in three distinct ways. Number one, the cost for everyday items for ordinary Americans, the affordability issue. Secondly, yes, foreign policy, which is important. But yesterday, I mean, I don't think it's a surprise that he said this yesterday as he's off to China. He's been consumed with this the Beijing summit for quite some time. And of course, the war in Iran, which is not going according to plan. And then lastly, his own sort of personal mark he's trying to leave on the nation and the nation's capital, including yesterday we get reporting that the cost of his reflecting pool renovation between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument has exploded 10 times.
By the way, do you notice how he lies about all of those things, Willie? He lies, goes, oh, I know this guy that did pools, and it's going to only cost us $1 million, and then it's going to cost us this, and then it keeps exploding, and then the MAGA responds, oh, what are you, idiot? Of course it's going to go. No, he always starts with it. He did it with a ballroom. It's going to be 100, 200 million, and it's perfect. It's not going to cost taxpayers out. Then 200 becomes 4 million. Comes $1 billion that taxpayers who were struggling with all of those costs, let's show them again, all of those costs that they felt like were a lot easier to afford under Joe Biden than under Donald Trump. These Americans now are going to be paying for $1 billion Marie Antoinette-style ballroom for an arch for all of the nonsense that he is obsessed about right now.
Scrambling to respond after the state's Supreme Court struck down a voter-approved congressional redistricting plan. The new maps could have added as many as 4 additional Democratic House seats in Virginia. Democratic leaders in Richmond signaled they plan to appeal the ruling to the U.S. Supreme Court, but legal experts noted the state court decision might be final because it did not involve federal law. Let's bring in Politics Bureau Chief and Senior Political Columnist at Politico, Jonathan Martin.
Jonathan Martin, this Virginia decision is just one of these moments. It lets you see what Democrats do best, and that is catastrophize. like locusts falling from the heaven, dogs and cats living together, and yet you're like me. I'm like, okay, how close do you want to carve this to the bone, Republicans? Because you got a real problem coming, and what may happen is you may actually cause Democrats to pick up a lot more seats because I've seen this time and time again. Parties get too clever by half and it blows up in their face. You think that's happening right now. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I wrote a piece today that it's just not worth it for Republicans to take the raw political case, and we can leave the moral case for somebody else to make. The raw politics are this. If the Republicans do this and scramble to basically dilute black political power across the country, they risk 3 things, in my view, at least. Number one is the historic gains Trump made in 2024 with black voters, especially working class black voters, especially men. Trump got 21% of black men voters in this country by some estimates. Number 2, you're going to further energize Democrats in a year, Joe, where they're already fired up and ready to go, to borrow a phrase. And lastly, as you point out, you cut the salami too thin and you're at risk of creating more competitive seats for incumbent House Republicans who've never run general elections. All they know is primary politics and being more MAGA than now. And suddenly they got a district that, has got 33% of black folks and some suburban whites. And all of a sudden they got a competitive race for the first time. So this may be in Trump's interest. I just don't see how this is in the interest of the party going forward, given the gains they made with black folks in 2024, how fired up Democrats already are, and then just all of these seats that are already now going to be in play. So
Jim, I want to just follow up with you on this. I've always looked at those districts and wildly gerrymandered districts that have been pieced together so the Civil Rights Act could be followed. And I always thought, okay, good on policy. I understand this. This makes a lot of sense. But at the end of the day, this is what I've believed for 30 years since I was in Congress looking at it. I go, but the great irony here is this actually hurts Democrats overall because you're taking a lot of the Democrats' strongest voters and you're taking them out of all of these districts that would end up hurting Republicans.
There was always, Joe, as you know, in the South, always being the last 30 plus years, a tacit and in some cases explicit bargain between old guard black Democrats and a lot of conventional white Republicans. And the bargain was this: you win, I win. You get your seat, I get my seat. Everybody goes home happy. Everybody goes home happy, except for the fact that you had fewer competitive races in the South. And yes, to your point, you had fewer opportunities for Democrats to win House races once polarization set in and once the two parties became so purely polarized and people like Gene Taylor on the coast of Mississippi or John Barrow over in Georgia couldn't win any longer in majority white districts as white Democrats. So it was good for the traditional CBC Democrats who got safe seats. And it was great, obviously, for the Republicans who had heavily white seats in the, deep South, but it wasn't great for competition. And I think now, unwittingly, Joe, you could have the Republican Party, by racing to grab a half dozen extra seats this year, create more competitive races in a good cycle for Democrats. And by the way, 2028, unless Trump somehow stages a big recovery politically, if Trump's approval numbers stay in the 30s in 2028, you're going to see a similar cycle in 2028. So you're looking at the possibility of a bunch of new competitive seats for at least 2 cycles in a row across the South.
Still ahead on Morning Joe, Democratic Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva will join us to weigh in on the growing backlash surrounding the president's immigration.